got an idea about the sacred I want to run by you.
Sure.
Technically. Well, imagine that you have a hierarchy of thinkers such that, and this would exist over time.
Okay.
Such that some thinkers have more thinkers dependent on them than other thinkers.
Sure.
Right? So they're more seminal, right? You'd get a rough approximation of that with citation counts in the scientific endeavor. And citation counts are a pretty good index of quality as well as quantity, at least compared to every other index that we have. So you can imagine a dependency structure among thinkers, so that obviously a thinker like Milton would be of primary depth, and Shakespeare, the people who are part of the canon. And so rather than conceptualizing the canon as a consequence of the arbitrary decisions of arbiters of taste, let's say, you could say that the canon is the consequence of the cumulative impact of a thinker's thoughts moving forward. And some thinkers are more key than others. My sense, for example, and there's historical reasons for this, obviously, that the biblical corpus stands at the bottom of the Western canon. And then there are thinkers who have their feet placed firmly in that tradition, Dante, Milton, Shakespeare, etc. And then a branching structure above all that. Okay, so it's a matter of dependency. And so how fundamental a given thought is dependent on how many other thoughts are dependent on it for its validity. Okay, now this works out neuropsychologically too. So imagine that you have Janoff Ballman, who talked about trauma, has a theory that's analogous to this, and I think it fits in well with the entropy control theories of Friston. So then imagine that your perceptions and therefore your emotional regulation are dependent upon a nested sequence of assumptions. And a given phenomenon can violate an assumption, and the degree of entropy that's produced by the assumption violation is proportionate to the depth of the assumption. Right. So Janoff Ballman talks about, for example, her model of trauma is shattered assumption, the deeper the assumption. So for example, one way you can be traumatized in a marital relationship is through the discovery of infidelity.
Yeah.
Right.
Your hyperpriors get destroyed.
Yeah, so what do you call them?
Hyperpriors. In the Bayesian brain framework, in Friston's framework, the sort of priors that you use to run any of the Bayesian approximation. I actually don't like using the Bayesian math because you don't actually run the math. You run a dynamical system approximation, but that's how they talk about it in the literature. These are sort of your these are the things that are applied in your predictive modeling in the most context invariant manner. So they apply. Yeah,
right. Context invariant. Right. Yeah. Well, that's another way of thinking about it too, is that something more fundamental applies across more situations and time spans. Right. Okay. So here's a secondary consequence of that, I think. So then imagine that the degree to which you can handle entropy emerging as a consequence of the violation of your assumptions is proportionate to your social status. Okay, and the reason for that is that the better your reputation, and therefore the better your situation in the social environment happens to be, the more resources you can bring to bear on a problem if one emerges. Okay, now imagine your serotonin system indexes that, because we know serotonin is one of the systems that's implicated in the relationship between social status and emotional regulation.
Sure.
So now the serotonin system has inputs into the memory systems that have this hyperdependency structure, and they're a tuner. And so that you imagine disruption would be characterized in terms of its estimated magnitude by the depth of the presumption that was being violated.
Sure.
And then there's a control mechanism off to the side of that, such that the more tenuous your grip on the social environment is, the higher the level of negative emotion that's produced in relationship to the violation of a given level of assumption.
Sure.
Right. Okay. So that makes sense to you. That seems to be
far,
reasonable.
Very clear, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good.